Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe some along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin, and if you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or anybody you know would like to be on the show and chatting with me, feel free to reach me on Twitter. My handle there is IsaacR11, or you can Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11 at fossadon.org. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get started with our guest. I'm really looking forward to it. Been a fan of this person for a bit, and let's just get into it. So my guest today is Rizel Scarlett. Rizel, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Hey y'all, yeah, like you said, my name is Rizel Scarlett. I'm a staff developer advocate at TBD, and I'm excited to chat with you. I've been looking forward to chatting with you too.
Yeah. Yeah, like we were talking a little bit before we got started, a little bit of behind the scenes action. Rizel like lost power like 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, because that's how the world works. But we're rolling with it, and I'm looking forward to. I think this is gonna be a great conversation. And how I like starting my conversations is finding out where people got started. I'm a huge fan of superheroes, so I love origin stories. So Rizel, do you remember when technology first introduced itself to you, and maybe caused you or excited you enough for you to be a part of technology going forward?
That is a good question. I wish it was more like altruistic in the beginning.
Sure. Try and get some.
But
You trying to get some money? Was that the story? Trying to get some money?
yeah,
Yeah,
it was
that's fine.
like,
Nothing wrong with
oh,
that.
18-year-old kid, and I realized you go into college, you choose a major, and then it started to hit me like, oh, my family's actually really poor. Like I was like, yeah, we're
Yeah,
poor, but I can go
yeah,
do college. I'm like, oh, we're way more poor than I thought. So I
yeah. Sure,
started Googling like what other, like I was like, okay, let's say I'm only able to complete 2 years of college. Like
sure.
what job could I be able to
Yeah,
get? Like psychology is not it. That's the degree I was originally studying. And I switched into more like a IT support type of role.
sure,
And at first, like I said, the money was the thing, but I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I love like solving problems for people and helping
sure.
people. Like, I think that's what I really love. And I mean, I guess when I was little, I've always been addicted to social media, MySpace, and all that, but I was never like saying, oh, I should be in tech because of MySpace, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
I
that's awesome.
think, yeah, go ahead.
Finish up what you're saying. Sorry. No, finish what you're saying.
Oh, no, all I was saying was, yeah, like after that, once I was in IT and I saw people, because I did IT at HubSpot, and people were like coding and talking about APIs, and I was like, that looks really cool. I want to do it, but I don't know how. That's when I went to a coding boot camp and then college and went into software engineering. But yeah, started off with money and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Like honestly, at the end of the day, like if you're trying to better yourself, your point is pretty valid. Like if I can only go to college or learn something very quickly, right? Or not quickly, that's not fair to say, but what are some of the paths that I can make? Like people immediately think of like financial success and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer." And it's like you realize you're in
That's not even
school for like
fair.
8 years and then you're
Yeah.
in debt like $500,000 at the end of it. So like you don't start making money until you're in your 50s, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, I mean I totally agree. Like I grew up pretty poor too. Like, I wouldn't have been able to go to college if it wasn't for financial aid. Like
Yeah.
I just I never really thought about like trying to make money. I just wanted to like have a better life. And
Yeah.
obviously money is a part of that. And then obviously like when you get your first job, you're like, "Oh, there's a lot of money." Like, I mean,
Yeah.
even like you're starting like even like when you get started, like even like entry level salaries for most tech jobs are like more than our parents made, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and
Wait.
yeah, I remember talking to my dad when I got like my first offer for a job, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I was making," and he just gave me this look like he didn't understand. Like he is like,
Like I
"I've
can't.
been." Yeah, like he very much was like, "Wait, like that's like," and then it became this very uncomfortable thing. Like that's a whole conversation for a different day, where it's like, you're making more money than your parents are, and you're 22 years old, 23
Yeah.
years old. Um, but anyway, no, that's great. Like, so when did, so you're doing kind of like IT help desk stuff, right? Did you enjoy that work because of the customer service side of it or the technical side of it? And there's a reason why I'm asking this question.
Oh, that's a good question. I almost think it was a mixture of both, right? Like I loved being like, oh my God, I just solved this problem that like in the
Yeah,
beginning I thought was hard. Like this is cool. And then I liked when people would be like, thank you, like you really unblocked something for me. So I think it was like a mixture of both. But there got to a point in IT where I maybe it was because I was junior or whatever. I cockily, that's not the right word, but like overconfidently
sure,
thought
sure.
like, yo, I know everything about IT now. I'm done. I need something else to keep me more excited and stimulated.
Yeah. No, that I mean that's fair. The reason why I ask is because you mentioned earlier that like you like the idea of solving problems, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
like I started out doing like help desk. Like my first job, like in tech, was at Geek Squad, like for Best Buy. Like that was
Oh,
my
yeah.
first job. So like I really enjoyed like the solving problems and like making people feel better sort of thing.
Yeah.
And like I had a boss like who he was like, I can teach you anything you want about computers. I can give you a book and you can go and learn about computers, but I can't teach you how to help people. I can't teach you customer service. I can't teach you like the problem solving skills stuff. And that kind of stuck with me for a long time. And yeah, I very feel the same way. It's like if you're into solving problems, like the problems will introduce themselves in different ways. Like I just see technology as kind of like a tool to help me solve problems, just like
Yeah.
any other job, right? Like if I'm an auto mechanic, like I have all this skill to be able to fix a car to like make somebody's car run, right? That's how I see
Yeah.
things. Everything is like in the problem solving space. And I think there's some people that enjoy solving problems. And I think some people in tech specifically that they care a lot about the science behind it, the technology behind it. They're interested
Mm,
in performance. They're interested in some of the cybersecurity stuff. I'm not like that. I'm very much
me
on the.
neither.
I'm very much like, can I just like help like some random person in some job do something? And then that becomes
Right.
like, oh, so you're like trying, you're interested in a company making money off of your work, which I think is fair. But anyway, um, so like so to kind of go back, you kind of wanted to get into the more the software development side. Was it just because like the topics that people were talking about when you'd go to their desk or whatever, it was interesting, or did you really see it as like I could probably solve more interesting problems by going down this path?
Second one, I was like,
Yeah,
I can see interesting problems because I was like, right now, IT support feels like reactive. Like this
yeah,
person broke
yeah,
for them. I'm like, what if it could be proactive? I'm like, I could make a better website or application than this if I
yeah.
knew how to. So that's where it came from for me.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty fascinating. Like the idea that it is true. Like if you're a support desk or whatever, like you're dealing with a constant churn of reactive conversations. People are thankful, usually,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like the proactives where you feel like you're actually making a difference instead of just kind of putting your finger in a hole, right? Um, it is kind of fascinating, like that whole concept. So you went to coding boot camp, right? As so like to transition is like you realize, okay, I want to be an engineer, I want to build software, I want to like solve problems with technology in that way. So you went to a
yeah.
coding boot camp. I like to, you don't have to dive super deep into it. I'm curious because I have an opinion of coding boot camps.
Mhm.
It's not the most positive.
Yeah.
Just from an outsider's perspective, I'd like to get your thoughts as somebody who went through the program, and what were your expectations going in? What were your outcomes? Like, I'd like to get a little bit of sense as to like if you got value out of it.
Yeah. Well, first I'll kind of just say my motivation for choosing it, right? Like you know how I told you that I couldn't really continue college and had to go into IT support, and
Sure.
you mentioned financial aid. I was not eligible for that because
Okay.
I was documented at the time. So I was like, low key, I need like a free coding boot camp. I don't know if
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
exists,
Yeah.
but yeah, I ended up going to Resilient Coders, and I will say, I think out of many of the coding boot camps I've heard about that sound like they are fraught with like fraud and all these other things. I think this one was actually quality. It's free, so it's not like I put a lot of money into it and then I don't
Mm-hmm.
get back value. And they also gave us like a stipend because they
Sure.
recognized, oh, you won't be able to like just quit your job and be
Yeah.
able to just sit there and learn this. And it was for people of color in particular in the Boston area.
Oh,
I will
cool.
say yeah, yeah. So it was a really good coding boot camp with a really good mission. It was hard. Like it was a lot. And I ended up went after I got my software engineering job, still going to college. It was like a mixture of like after because I used like my software engineering money and educational benefits to do that. But it was a mixture of like maybe imposter syndrome where I'm like, oh, in these interviews, I'm not like grasping data structures as well. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
really understanding like what my coworkers are talking about. I'm like just pretending. So I was like, I want to fill in the gaps. Um, so I kind of had both sides, and I think coding boot camps are good if, especially back in the day, not now with the job market, if you want to land the job quickly and you want to get like those applicable, how do I build an application type of skills. But if you want deeper than that, you're going to be missing a couple of things.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
thing.
If you don't mind, I'd like to kind of drill into a little bit about like, you mentioned like you had to stop going to school, right? I want, and I'm curious to know, like, because of the fact that you kind of knew that you were kind of have to figure it out yourself, and
Yeah.
is that kind of led you to, I don't want to use this phrase, but I'm going to have to because it's the only thing I can think of, like that self-starter mentality, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like you're always like you're looking, because I feel like I'm the same way, where it's like, okay, I'm the only way I'm going to get this is if I go and get it myself. Like no one's going to help
Yeah.
me. Like even with the financial aid thing, like I had to, like my parents weren't going to help me even filling out the paperwork, right? So
Yeah.
like so I went through that, and um like I'm curious, and the reason I'm kind of rambling, but I love to get your thoughts is like the self-starter mentality and how it's kind of helped you, through different parts of your career, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I didn't always have the privilege of being able to have some things done for me. So even in something like software engineering or DevRel, I've been more like willing, or I don't know, maybe I have, since I already had to deal with those type of things outside of tech, I've been like, okay, here's a problem. No one else knows how to solve it. I'm gonna figure out somehow, some way, if that makes any sense.
No, it definitely does, and I think that those are the kind of people. Like I've talked to people on my show about this a lot, right? Where it's like, you kind of naturally kind of rise, not only say faster, but you become a bit more visible when you're interested in owning your own career and owning that process, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you want to forwardly or vertically progress, you have to kind of take your career and that initiative to yourself, because yeah, you can get some help by some folks. People can send a letter down or whatever, but at the end of the day, like you have to own it.
Yeah.
So you're in this coding boot camp. I'd imagine that they're kind of like, the agreement is that you give some of your salary when you get a job back to them is to kind of recontribute. No, okay, because
Oh,
that's one of the things that I've always saw, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of
that
gross.
sucks.
It's kind of
I never had
gross,
to
right?
do that. Yeah, it
Um,
is.
yeah. So
Like
you
you
get
finally get to where you want to make money, and then you have
yeah,
to make money because you're giving it
yeah, yeah.
to them.
Um, I understand the model. Like I totally get it. Otherwise, like how are you going to be able to do these things? But whatever. So you get your first job,
Yeah.
and my thought, and so to kind of go back to Rizel when she was talking with the developers and doing the help desk stuff, was your expectation for the job the same as the is what the job ended up being, or was it a bit different?
Different.
Yeah.
I thought, I don't know. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be coding all these apps and everything.
Yeah,
And then they
sure.
I joined a company and we're using, oh, dang, we're not using GitHub. We're using Mercurial, C
Yep.
Sharp. I'm like, I don't know what this is. I
Sure,
was like
sure.
terrified. So it did not match. And I was also working in an industry, like one of my first jobs, or my first couple of jobs, they weren't really aligned with like things that I was like, oh, this is really helping push people forward and things that were interesting to me. I
Mm.
worked, one of the jobs was like in the maritime industry, and then the other one was like insure tech. So I was like, boo.
That's
It was
funny.
cool though. It was cool to learn how they were using stuff. But I'm like, at the end of the day, it's not really my passion. And I thought I was
Yeah.
going in. I was like, I'm gonna help the world with my cool apps. And I'm like, I don't have the skills. Yeah.
Man, I wish I could go back to a time where I wasn't so broken, where I'm like, I'm gonna change the world. Like that
Yeah.
seems like just like a optimistic way of going about things. And then you realize, like, I know my first job was in insurance too, and you realize really
Yeah.
quickly, like, oh, like this is the job. And you talk to people that have been
Yeah.
in the job for like 40 years, because that's how financial service companies work, right? You're like, oh man, like you care a lot about claims, huh? Like, like not to knock those folks, but like you know what I mean. Like it's so. obviously that you realize pretty quickly that you weren't interested in like the domain. I think that's important to call out. Is like you might have enjoyed the tech to some extent, but like you weren't enjoying like the domain, like the way you were using the tech to solve the problems.
Yeah.
Like when so obviously during this time you're young, you're still getting started, but you're shaping your opinion on how you want to do things. Did you realize pretty quickly that you liked certain areas of tech yet, or were you still kind of like, I want any tech job? Like I know like a lot of people are like, oh, I got started doing web development, so I'm into web development, or I wanted to build APIs, so I'm doing APIs. Like, did you realize there are areas of tech that you found more interesting than others at this time?
That's a good question. It might have been like I had mixed feelings during the time because I was really getting into like AWS and DynamoDB. I was like, this
Mm,
part's really cool. I
yeah,
tried to like I was like, even if I'm not really interested in insurtech, this part's really cool to me.
sure, cloud stuff, yeah,
Yeah, I was like, I love this. But at the same time, I didn't really have the like most inclusive, welcoming team. So there was like another thing in my mind where I was like, I really want to leave tech. Like I was like, maybe this isn't for me. Like over I was like, I expected this to be something else, and like every
sure,
day I'm not happy.
yeah,
But what happened for me, where I started thinking maybe I want to do DevRel, is on the side while I was doing my software engineering job and going to college. I was crazy then. I don't know how I had that much energy, but I also helped to start a like it was not really a coding boot camp at that time. It was more like a little meetup where we were
sure.
teaching like women of color how to code. And I was like, okay, this is back to like where I wanted to help people. So that was like fun, like where I would teach people HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it helped me to like go back over some of those fundamentals. And that's when I was like, I like software engineering. Clearly, I like the cloud stuff and all that. But I was like,
Yeah.
I kind of want to shift more into teaching people and talking about code. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but
No,
that's
it
where I
does.
started
It does.
getting.
And the reason why I'm curious about that is because I have this singular belief that depending on like when you were like in your late teens or even early
Mhm.
teens, it like that shapes like if you're in technology, like that's like the technology that was prevalent at the time is the technology you end up learning. Like my example always is like I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s. MySpace was enormous. Everybody
Yeah.
was building MySpace pages, like, and you could customize MySpace pages with like CSS and HTML and JavaScript and like just do wild things. And so that
Yeah.
that was my introduction into like, oh, like you have this unlimited creativity to just do weird
Mhm.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it sounds to me like you were a little bit of that. I think also too, what's interesting about what you were saying is like you were very you recognized that you had challenges getting to where you were even at that early stage, so
Yeah.
you wanted to, I mentioned this earlier, pass the ladder down in some way to get people that had similar backgrounds to you into that
Yeah.
same place. Is that something that you thought of, like, or was it just like, no, it's my responsibility, like there wasn't any thinking behind it, you just did it?
No, I think I thought of it. I think I
Yeah,
thought of it. Someone had reached out to me with the idea, and I was like, you know what? It would have been so nice. Like it was nice to be in a group of black and brown people. But I was like, what if it was like all black
yeah,
women or like
yeah, yeah.
that would be cool. So yeah, I think I thought about it. I wish it was just like it's my responsibility, but no, I
Sure,
thought
sure. Did you
about it.
was this also shaped maybe by the fact that like you mentioned Resilient Coders was of similar ilk, right? Where it's like focusing on people of color to get, more access into technology. Did you recognize pretty quickly like, hey, folks like me don't have as much opportunity as
Yeah,
folks that don't look like me, right? Like
yeah.
when did it was there an I don't want to use the term awakening, but I'm going to use it because whatever. Was there like an epiphany that you had where it's like, oh, like this is kind of hard for me, and this is me being white male, just about, or do you recognize everything is harder, like initially, or is it certain things are harder?
That's a good question. Maybe that's a good question. Maybe it didn't really hit me that much, right? Like when I was in IT and all that, I was like, I'm chilling, whatever. But at my job where I said it wasn't as inclusive, I was like, oh shoot, this is really hard. Like I feel left
Yeah,
out. Like it seemed like I don't know if I will always tell myself I'm making this up in my head, but I don't think so. Like we're like my coworkers would help each other, and then I'd be like, I need help, and they'd be like, oh, Rizel
Yeah,
again. I'm like,
yeah,
oh
yeah,
no.
yeah.
So that's where I was like, this part is hard because you're kind of on your own, and you kind
Hmm.
of just software engineering is teaching yourself, but I'm like, it's even more where you don't really have that buddy that's like, I got you. I'll give you the tips on navigating this company or anything. So that's where I was like, I would be interested in helping other women of color learn about how to
Yeah.
navigate the industry and all
Yeah,
that.
that and just so we're clear, like I'm fascinated by this idea that is it because of your environment or is it because of your upbringing in some way? Like I've had conversations like this with other folks where it's like, you learn things from as you're when you're a kid that you're like, oh, I can't do this or I don't have the opportunity to do this because like that's what your environment tells you. And then you have the other side where you have like an actual moment where you're like, oh, I'm at a job and my coworkers don't enjoy helping me. Like those are two separate like things that can change how you view things, right? Like there's
Yeah.
this habitual kind of environment that you were brought up in, and then there's an immediate thing. And I'm kind of curious as to like you realize that you had this, I mean, I'm just going to say it, you had this skill, right? The skill that you're like, I recognize the fact that people like me are at a disadvantage. I want to do better. So
Yeah.
what were, you mentioned the meetup thing. Were there other things that you were doing as well at the time that kind of centered around that? Or was it very much just like trying to build community?
Just trying to build community
Yeah.
there. I don't think I did it. I didn't even have time. Like it would
Yeah.
be like
Sure. Sure.
work and then college, and then on the weekend I would do the meetup. But yeah, that's a really interesting question you said about like upbringing versus environment. I really think I was in the dark as a
Yeah.
kid. Like I grew up in a black neighborhood, black churches, black schools. I didn't even realize that like there's any discrimination. It was until I got my
Sure.
jobs that like, wait a minute, why am I being treated differently? What's going on? Or like I would tell people, I'd be like, yeah, this happened. And they're like, Rizel, they're like being racist to you. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that.
So that's interesting. Like
Yeah.
we don't need to go down this
Yeah.
path too
Sorry.
far. I have no. I'm interested because I don't have the same background as you. We talked about this a
Yeah.
bit before we got started, right? So so I've always had an assumption that underrepresented groups they tend to teach the younger generation, oh, be careful in this situation. Don't do this. Watch out for this. And it sounds to me like you were kind of in a bubble because you never engaged with like the outside of your community like thing. So that's kind of
Yeah.
fascinating to me because I always assume that I've seen movies and whatever, or I've watched documentaries where it's like, oh yeah, we have to teach people at a very young age to like, don't cross the street or,
Yeah.
like do all these sorts of things, right? So I'm interested to hear like you say specifically like, oh, I didn't even know people were being racist.
Yeah. I mean,
Like
I knew
that's
people were being racist, but
sure,
I
sure,
couldn't
sure.
recognize like, oh, that's a microaggression. I think
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question. I think my parents are not from America. They're from
Mm,
South America. So they are not really as aware of some of the race relations until me and my sisters maybe like started growing up and like
sure.
explaining to them some of those stuff. Cause yeah, my parents are not from here, so they did warn me on stuff, but not
Sure.
all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they don't have like like the systemic background of like having to deal with not being a white person in America, basically.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and good, bad, or indifferent, they're just probably happy to be here, right?
Yeah. They're
Like
like, yay, we got out of
yeah,
our country.
yeah. Like it's funny because I have friends that are first generation,
Yeah.
or it's even second generation, and they're very much just like they have like this. This is way better than where I came from,
Yeah.
and I'll put up with a bunch of stuff because it's much better, and I'm just here like, and I sit here and I'm like, is it that great though? Like, and, I mean, but again, I've never lived in other countries, so I don't
Yeah.
know, right? So it's like this idea of you just like the I this is a rant, so I apologize. I've talked about this American dream thing. It's like, well, is the American dream really a thing? And I talk to people that are first and second generation, and they're very much like, yeah, the American dream is very much still a thing, but I don't see it like that because I don't have any other context. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think also too, and you probably have a point opinion on this as well. I also feel like people that are new to this country have substantially more hustle culture and want to forwardly progress than people that have been in this country for generations and generations. Because I think like it's the American dream thing. Like once I get here, like I'm just gonna grab every single thing I can, and
Yeah.
if I can't, it's whatever. But like I'm gonna try. Do you see
Yeah.
like maybe a part of that too? Like in your upbringing, it's like you know you mentioned growing up poor. You mentioned in not having a lot of background in this country, your family history, and you're just like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna grab every single thing that I have an opportunity to grab, and if I can't, I'm gonna try again.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, because I didn't want my parents bringing me to this country to be a waste. So I don't know. I felt
Interesting.
that pressure that I'm like, I
Interesting.
gotta do something.
That's hard though.
Yeah.
That's hard for somebody trying to figure out what they want to do in life in general, right? Like, you don't want to be a disappointment, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's I've never that's an interesting thing as well, and I understand why. Yeah, maybe that's part of it too. Like the hustle culture thing for people new to this country. It's like, oh, I don't want. There's a lot of effort taken to get me from where I'm from to where I am here.
Yeah.
That's interesting, and this is developing way away from technology, but it's fascinating to me because
My bad.
uh, I don't know. This is more interesting than me talking about I don't know Taylor Swift or something. I don't know. Uh, anyway, so you realize that you're interested in like I would say web stuff, right? Like you're interested in web stuff, and like you're definitely interested in this education and helping the next generation out of stuff. When did you
Yeah.
realize that like the education side of things could be an actual job?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah. So like I told you, I was teaching people,
Yep.
and then another thing I was doing, because like I told you, at my job, I'm like, man, I'm really behind. I'm really trying to catch up and be able to like talk with my coworkers is
Mm-hmm.
like in the morning I will watch like a course, like part of a course or a YouTube video while I was getting ready to
Mm-hmm.
be like, okay, let me see how I can like get up to speed with my coworkers. And sometimes like maybe it'll be like a conference talk from Brian Douglas or Angie Jones or Kelsey Hightower. And then I'd be like, yo, how do all these black people get to do courses and like
I was
speak
gonna
on
ask. You just mentioned like three very well-known black people. So like there was obviously something there, right? Like you wanted to see
yeah.
people that were like you that were successful, right? Sorry I interrupted you, but continue.
No, go ahead. I think that's where I was gonna end. I was just
Yeah.
like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
how do I get to do that? And I started looking up like I don't know, guys. I guess I was low-key like looking them up on LinkedIn and be like, what's their job? So that's when
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, like y'all make a good amount of money. Maybe I could do something like this.
Yeah. Here's another question. Was
Mhm.
was there you saw the visibility and you equated that with success and money? Or did you equate it with like these individuals are doing the thing that I'm doing for free? So
Like,
that could be yes, that cool.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I think a lot of people, good, bad, or indifferent, they want to get into like developer relations or whatever developer experience because it's a highly visible job and like, hey, like if I can be good in DevRel, like I can just go from job to job to job and I could just make as much money as humanly possible, right?
Yeah.
Um, and if that's someone's prerogative, cool, good for you. Like I've had folks on my show that are very much like I'm a developer advocate for hire. Like that's my thing. Like I'll go like if you want to pay me to talk about your product and your services, I'll do that. Like that's not a big deal. Which is cool. My thing that's more interesting that this at least speaks to me is like I have to actually believe in what I'm talking about to an extent.
Yeah.
And not to say those people don't, but like I've had
It's hard.
opportunities to do developer advocacy work for companies, and I'm just like, I don't think
Yeah.
so, right?
Yeah.
And
It'd be hard
and
to talk.
yeah, so to kind of go back, like you see these folks,
Mhm.
folks that have a similar background to you, and they're doing the things you want to do. What was your next
Mhm.
step? Like you mentioned that you were like low key, like looking at Kelsey Hightower, Angie Jones's like LinkedIn. Like, did you reach out to these folks? Did you try to like get any sort of uh, you know, uh, you know, advice from folks like that, or were you very much just like, I want to get to that point? So you started looking into different ways to how to get to that point.
That is a really good question. Okay, so like I told you, right? It wasn't about like fame or anything. I don't want
Yeah,
no spotlight on me. I actually never public spoke before. I was just like, I like writing blog posts and stuff, so
sure,
I wanted.
okay,
But um, and I wanted to. I mean, I guess I wanted to teach people, but I was like small groups. Like I was like,
Yeah.
I can make a slide deck. I didn't reach out to. I think I might have reached out to one person, not like Kelsey and Angie and Brian. I was like, they're too important for me.
Yeah.
But I think, dang, why do it? Her name is slipping from me. She worked at Twilio at one point, and then she worked at Twitch, and I like talked to her.
Mm.
And she was more on like, I guess, like program management, developer relations, but she kind of like talked to me about like what things would help. Like she was like, you need to join like Twilio champions or something like that. I didn't do any of those things, I'm not gonna lie. I ended up, it was like maybe 2 years of me being like, oh, I'm interested, but I didn't really act on it much because I was like, maybe it's not something that's possible for me. I went into another job after that job, another software engineering job, and he encouraged me, my manager encouraged me to write blog posts, and I wrote
Mm-hmm.
blog posts about actions and stuff like that, and I was like, oh, this is cool. So that almost helped to build up my portfolio, but not on purpose. And
Sure.
then I think after that, I think I was burnt out. This
Mm.
makes no logical sense. I was burnt out not from that job, but just because I left the other job I didn't like and jumped
Yeah.
into the new job. And
Sure.
then I just quit because I got married. My husband's also a software engineer, and I was like, dude, I think I need like 3 months off. I'm like so burnt out. And during that time, I just started applying to developer advocate jobs. I had no context on anything. Like to
All
be honest,
right.
like it makes no logical
That's
sense. There's
you understand how wild that is, right? You're like, I'm not digging this thing. I'm just gonna quit my job. My husband's making money, so we're fine there. And then like, what are the kind of jobs that I want? Oh, developer advocate. I have no background. I have like no real context what the job is, but I see all these people that are doing things that I enjoy doing, so I'm gonna apply for those kind of jobs. That is wild. That is
Yeah,
wild.
now that I look
Um,
back, it made no sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, but good for you because one, you had an opportunity because of to some privilege to like, oh, I can look for the job that I want. I think that's great. But I think a lot of folks are guilty of being a bit idle and like, oh, I don't have a job or I'm not happy in the job. I got to go find something new, and like they maybe take something that they're not super keen on. But it sounds like
Mhm.
you were very much like, this is the kind of job I want.
Yeah.
It has to be like a job that was working with stuff in problems and technology that I'm
Yeah.
interested in. Like you mentioned earlier, like insurance maybe wasn't my thing, right? That's
Yeah.
cool. And you see all these people that are like you, or similar to you, and you're like, hey, like they're doing something. And it's funny because I've had the opportunity to speak to all three of those folks on the show, and it's funny like I don't think about it specifically, but I don't really realize how important it is for folks like you to see
Yeah.
folks like them that are successful that are doing these things because you can look up to them as a role model or a not a pedestal but something to achieve to.
Yeah.
So here's the question. So you're looking for jobs, you're applying for these RAM developer advocate jobs. I imagine during this time you're probably doing a little bit of research into like what it takes to be successful in that sort of job.
Yeah.
What were some of the
Yeah.
things that you realize really quickly? It's like if people from the outside are like, oh, so you speak at conferences, you write some blog posts, maybe do some YouTube videos, like, and that's the job. Did you realize really quickly there's probably more to the job than just that?
A little bit, but I still
Yeah.
really didn't have the context. I know I Mary Thengwa had like this like resource of developer relations. I don't remember what it was called, and I think she stopped. It was like a newsletter plus a website.
Yep.
But I was like reading all that stuff, but it still didn't like I'm not gonna lie, like it still didn't make sense to me. I was just like, I want to try out blogging and educating people. Like
Sure.
I was kind of delusional. To
Yeah.
be honest.
No, I mean, I think it's fair. Like you wanted to do something very specific, and I'm like, oh, I only want a job where I get to do those specific things. That's fair. I mean, a lot of us are very lucky that we get to do a lot of the things that we enjoy doing, but we have to put up with like a little bit of nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And I've always
Yeah.
said that like if you can tolerate the nonsense that you have to do as a part of your job, like and you're happy with everything else, like you should stay in that job as long as humanly possible.
Yeah.
um, because most people, 99% of the job is nonsense,
Yeah.
right? And like they work really hard for that 1% where they get to feel a little bit of happiness. So you realize, so eventually you do get a job, right?
Yeah.
When you started that first developer relations job, what was like the first thing that you realized that what maybe an assumption that you had that was incorrect? You're like, oh, this is not something that I expected.
Ooh, that's a good question. Oh my God, that's a really good question. I
Good.
think, yeah. I'm like, I have to think about that. Um, I think I didn't realize that you have to work with so many different teams. Like,
Hmm.
that was one thing I didn't realize way much later into being a developer advocate that I need to be giving feedback to the product team
Yep.
and the product team. Like I didn't even think
Yeah.
about like building a relationship. I was just like putting out content because at the time I think I had the privilege to do so. Like I was a junior developer advocate. Brian was like really like mentoring me very well. He would like be kind of my eyes and ears and be like, oh, maybe you should like check out GitHub Copilot. And I'd be like, oh, okay. But
Yeah.
after he left, I was like, oh shoot, like there's
Now what?
there's stuff. Yeah. Like it's
Yeah.
not just creating content. So I think that's when I realized like, oh shoot, there's other things beyond this.
Yeah, yeah. I feel similar. I don't know if you've ever seen the infographic of like developer relations is like an iceberg, right? You've seen
Yeah.
it, right? Where it's like the
Yeah.
top is like speaking, blogging, whatever, and then underneath is like talking to the product, helping prioritize things, talking to customers, like all that stuff, right? I think like, and that's just a perception that'll be around forever, right? Because until you actually start working in DevRel, you don't know what the job is like. Like, and what's wild is too is that DevRel is different for every company. And
Yeah.
DevRel right now, like, I mean, you started doing DevRel stuff, in the last 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So DevRel between then and now is like changed a ton. Like I
Yeah.
remember when like some of the big like the huge companies started building these DevRel orgs, right? And what they would do is they would go out and they would hire like all the famous people on the internet,
Mhm.
right? Like you would say, oh, like that person has 40,000 Twitter followers. They got hired by X, and then whatever. Not X the company, but X the fake company.
Yeah.
So well, anyway. But like I realized like and I was thinking like, are they hiring people because they're domain experts, or are they hiring people for visibility? And I
Yeah.
think that there was this kind of wave where you hired people that were subject matter experts and they had visibility, and then like there's this kind of this cycle that went through, and like those people left and whatever, and now you're kind of at this point where a lot of companies they're trying to figure out like how to showcase how successful DevRel can be. So,
Yeah.
things are changing. A lot of people are like starting their own businesses because they realize
Yeah.
that creating content is the thing they enjoy, and it's the thing that can make them money. For us, like dealing with like the bureaucracy of working at a large organization. Um, and what I like, and the reason why I'm going through all this is because I'd like to kind of get your thoughts. Is like, you enjoyed the content creation part. Did
Mhm.
you also enjoy like the under the water part of the iceberg too, like the engagement with the product teams and all that sort of stuff, or was it just like, okay, this is like it's not as exciting, but I'll do it because it's part of the job.
That's a good question. I think I loved the internal parts just as much as the external parts. I think I ended up like at GitHub, like getting to know so many people across the company. And that was something Brian encouraged me to do as well. So I built really good relationships. I felt like, I felt good when I would be like, it's back to the helping thing, right? Like I liked
Hmm.
the reason I wanted to create content was not just, oh, I just like creating content. It was to help people. And then on the flip side, internally, I would be like, oh, I seen someone like I think one time before someone posted on Hacker News about like their complaint about GitHub Copilot, I like caught it on the weekend and I was like, yo, team, look out for this. Like let's have
That's
something
funny.
prepared to respond. So
Yeah.
like I don't know, I felt mad amped about that. I was like, yeah, did it. So, so I like that stuff. I like talking to the product team and learning about like what they were coming out of with ahead of time and being like, yo, people are not liking this part. So we need to fix that. So it's fun either way for me.
Yeah, yeah. It is fascinating because I think initially it feels like a lot. It feels quite overwhelming because you think like a lot is kind of like you have this feeling of like there's a kind of a lot of expectations. Like there's a lot on me to kind
Yeah.
of be that conduit between users and product, or users and
Yeah.
engineer or whatever, right? And as we all know, like the alignment of the product isn't always the alignment of the people who use the product, right?
Yeah.
So I'd imagine you don't need to name specifics, but I'm curious is like, do you remember a time where you were like, no, community needs this, the people who use this product need this, and the product owners and the engineers were like, nah, they don't need that, they need this.
Interesting. I I wonder. I don't know if I've gotten to that point in my career yet, or if I have, I've like erased
Yeah,
it from my mind. I don't think I've gotten too many experiences where there's like a lot of pushback around something.
yeah,
Maybe I think at one point when GitHub Copilot had a lot more controversy around it, like I think we were more on the side of like let's not do too much content around
sure,
it, then we'll or like talk about it too much because we don't want to end up in like an article and then it's like
hmm,
Rizel said this, but I kind of like broke the rules a little bit and I was
yeah,
like I'm just gonna educate people. But I don't think there's a lot of times where like I came up with a product or people came up with a product idea and then I said let's do this instead and they pushed back.
yeah,
Not yet.
yeah. No, I mean that. I think that it's okay. I think that's also a testament to like how much community feedback and user feedback matter to some product teams. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for every product team, but like I've worked with folks at GitHub, like they care a lot
Yeah.
about
They do.
what their users are doing because they understand that if they make the users upset, the users will leave the platform,
Yeah. I
right?
agree. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I think
that's
I was
great.
at places where DevRel was like more liked, or I don't know what's the word,
Mm,
admired,
sure.
trusted, where I hear other people and they're like, oh, the DevRel team first to go, but I haven't worked at a company where we
Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first one. Like, I'll be the first one to say, like, I think I've interviewed more people that are GitHub DevRel than any other person in this entire thing. I've been doing the show for 3 years, and I've interviewed a lot of people from GitHub DevRel for whatever reason. I don't know why. Um, because they're cool. That's why. But I think the primary point that I'd like to make is like, if the folks that are being the voice of the customer or the voice of the user, if they have some form of credibility, that
yeah.
goes a long way. Because I think,
Yeah.
anybody can say, oh, customers need this. But like not everybody has to listen. But like if you say like customer needs this because here's some information, here's some data, here's some facts, here's some notes, or clips from people saying some things, and this is why we do it. Because I think that's one of the things that DevRel does that's a bit underappreciated is like usually DevRel they usually try to bring as much data to the conversation as possible
Yeah.
because let's be real, like, oh, you're just like you're in it for the clicks. That's like a DevRel like stereotype or whatever assumption. It's like no, like the clicks are cool, like sure, but like having actual data about usage, actual data from conversations or quotes from conversations, that's more important than hey, 50,000 people watch my video on whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. So, and then obviously, like we were talking about this a bit before, you kind of made a change. You moved away from your first developer advocacy role to a different one. And
Yeah.
we talked about a little bit earlier that it is a bit of a jump. Do you want to talk about what you're doing now and what excites you about what you're working on?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a jump and it might have seemed random to people, but I think I liked emerging dev tools or technology. So I was a little bit like curious. And then also I've seen like, oh, I have trusted people over there like
Mm-hmm.
Angie, my friend Nick DeJesus, and my friend Ebony. So I knew them from my old coding bootcamp before. But what I'm doing over there is, and people get it confused and they're like, it's Web3. But yeah, what I'm working on, or what TBD is working on, is something called Web5. And one part of it that I find really, really cool and interesting is this idea of, or this technology called verifiable credentials. It's like a W3C standard, and it allows you to have like a digital proof that you completed something or that you have something, you own something. And I know that doesn't sound like as cool at first, but like, like mobile driver's license that some states have, they're actually using verifiable credentials behind the scenes. And there's like other use cases where maybe like you went to an educational institution and it shut down, but you still have like this verifiable credential that like proves and shows that you went there. So I think what we're doing in terms of helping to evolve identity is really cool, because I think the way that identity is right now, it's kind of fragmented. You log into
Sure.
all these different sites and
Yeah.
all that.
It's literally
And
the
I think,
worst part about being a developer.
yeah.
Anyway, keep going. I'm
I think
sorry.
it's cool that we're like trying to solve
Yeah.
that. And I think the thing that attracted me most to TBD is they have this SDK called TBDex. And basically it's like this messaging service. It like under the courts this messaging service. But the problem it's supposed to solve is like the global exchange of money. And like I told you already, I'm an immigrant and I've had to send money to people
Mhm.
outside of America. And that's not fun. Like I gotta go to Western Union. I don't like that place.
It's very sketch. It's very
Yeah.
sketch. Yeah.
So if I could be on my phone and be like
Yeah.
tap to
Yeah.
send money like that, I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I want to be part of that. So it did seem kind of risky, kind of weird that I went into this, but I thought it's a cool challenge for me. Um, I it's also cool to see what it would be like to be at a company that's not as known and liked. I feel like everybody likes GitHub, so anything
Yeah.
I did, it would be people would be like, "Wow, good job!" But now I
Sure.
am
Yeah.
the struggle of like, oh, not everybody read my blog post. So I'm
You're
like,
trying
it's
to
kind
get
of
you're trying to get some share, right? Like that makes a lot of
yeah.
sense.
And I'm doing more technical work too. Like I'm contributing to the documentation and writing a lot of code. And I like the balance a little bit more.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a dumb question.
Okay.
So like I think a lot of people are aware of like Web3, right? You
Yeah.
know, like NFTs and blockchain and all of that sort of stuff. And you're talking about Web5. What happened to Web4?
Everybody asked that. I was like, every lady's gonna ask that.
Yeah.
Um, it's
It's
not
not a thing.
supposed
Yeah.
yeah, it's not supposed to be the next evolution of Web3.
But that's how
The
numbers
new
work, Rizel. That's how numbers work.
Hey, I didn't name it. If I was CEO, maybe I'll have a different name, but
Yeah, no, that's
they
fair.
they
Yeah, so for folks that haven't been listening to the show, like I chatted with Angie, who is on the team with Rizel at TBD, and we talked a little bit about this in our show. So check that out if you haven't. We talked a lot about like the idea of owning your own data, right? And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. Is like let's be real, we don't really own our data. We don't.
No.
Like all these other companies own our data and they make money off of our data. And the question becomes like, what happens if we now own our data? Like you're talking about from an identity perspective. Like what changes need to happen, I think, to society, in your opinion, like that will allow us to own our own data, at least in this particular regard, like in this identity space specifically.
Yeah, society overall. That's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of changes. One,
Yeah.
this is not really like right now, a lot of other companies are working on something similar too. Like if you've heard people talk about local first and all that.
Yep.
I just think for like the average non-technical person, they don't know the value or see the value, or it sounds complicated. Even something like, oh, go on to Mastodon, this federated, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like someone like my mom's gonna be like, what is that? I don't want to do that. Or even
Yeah.
my sister. So I think breaking it down and making it more accessible and hiding that, not hiding, but like not making it obvious, or making the user experience so streamlined that that average person doesn't know that they're doing all of this in the background. Another thing, I guess, is like companies, this part's harder, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
companies
Yeah.
make money off of our data. But I think if it gets to the point where it's like, oh, it's popular now for users to own their own data, other companies will start being like, okay, ours is not the cool way. We need to push more in that direction.
Yeah, I think think if I remember the chat I was having with Angie, I very much was kidding. Like I made a joke about like, does that mean that we start making money off of our own data? So like imagine this hypothetical
Cool.
world in the future where it's like, okay, I own my data and I license my data out to, I don't know, hospital or whatever, right? And then
Yeah.
hospital makes money off of my data because that's what companies do. Like,
Yeah.
do I get a little piece of that? Right. And I'm not expecting you to be like, yes, that's definitely, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about that because I think one thing's for certain. Every time you go to an internet site, every time you use an app, every time you do anything, like there's information being collected by you, and that information might be being sold to third parties, which will eventually make some company some money. Or I saw an article one time about how there's like 20 to 25 companies in the chain that make
Mhm.
money off of somebody clicking an ad, right?
Yeah.
Like so the idea of one of those individuals now being you, interesting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That is cool. That's interesting. I never thought about that of
Yeah,
me selling it. I don't know what the financial business model would be. I know there is a company that built their stuff off of Web5, and I was asking them kind of a similar question. They basically made like ChatGPT type of thing with Web5, and like your data just doesn't go back out to them. And I was like, how are you making money? And they're like, oh, we'll charge the user eventually. But that's a good question on if the user starts to charge money for
mm.
their data to be used. I don't know. That's cool though.
Yeah, and
It's a
I'll be
cool.
the first one to say that I'm not educated at all in this space. So I'm gonna ask. I ask dumb questions whenever I talk to people that are smarter than me in this space. So it's like we talk like this idea of like centralized versus decentralized information, right? And I think right now like and this is I'm just gonna say something that's probably not accurate, but this is how I see things. So right now, like everybody says that our data is very centralized. Like companies own our data. But
Yeah.
my response to that has always been it's not just one company. It's like hundreds of companies. My data is spread out across all of these different entities. So
Yeah.
my data is to an extent decentralized, but I don't
Yeah.
own any of it. So the decentralization is not from my standpoint. It's I just have a bunch of different vendors that I need to go against. So what is the advantages other than obviously privacy
Yeah.
to all these companies coming to me directly to get my data versus me just granting them access whenever I use their services?
That's a good question. I think um one part, I mean, I don't even know if this really answers your question because my brain
That's
went
fine.
all over the place.
Yeah,
But
sure.
one part is like, I guess, reusability of things. So like, if you're like, oh, I wanna go to what is it? Like, let's say Delta is like your main way of flying, and
Sure.
now you're like, oh shoot, they don't have Delta, this airline for me to use. I have to use United or whatever. But I have all of like my preferences set up there.
Yeah.
The other benefit is like you don't have to like refill in everything. You just take that data and
Yeah.
plop it into United. Um, I think more for me, like while like owning your data is cool. Like for me, the identity part of like having a credential, a
Yeah.
verifiable credential like a phone is like the thing that excites me more than the ownership of data. I
Sure.
guess verify that would still be owning your data, but
Yeah. I
yeah,
think the fact that we have to sign up like every website we go to we have to sign up for like
yeah,
that's a bummer, right? And I
yeah,
think if you folks at TBD can solve the problem, and it's like, no, like I mean, all these companies they need the same data points. Like, why do
yeah.
I need to type it into a form? Can't I just give them a key of some sort and they can request access or whatever it is, right? Like, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're a software engineer. You know how systems are built. No two systems are ever built the same. So there needs to be standards introduced for certain things, right?
Yeah.
So from your perspective, like the standards thing is interesting to me because who is at the table to help build the standards?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, they have working groups with the W3C, right?
Yep.
And they have like people working on particularly decentralized identity, um, or verifiable credentials. And then even for the data storage thing that we talked about with the DWN, that's not necessarily with the W3C, but there's this thing called the Decentralized Identity Foundation. And there's multiple, oh no, my camera turned off. I think it died.
Uh
Of
oh.
course, all the technological problems, but I can still talk through it very quickly.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it turns
Sure.
back. I'll switch to my other camera. But oh, there it is. What was I saying? What was I saying? Yeah, so the Decentralized Identity Foundation has multiple companies, like including Microsoft, Workday, Auth0, and then other smaller companies as well. So those are the people sitting at the table. And the Decentralized Identity Foundation is pretty open, I realize. So like anybody could say, I want to join this and learn more about what y'all are working on, and I want my voice to be heard in it.
That's great. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that I'll take away from all this. It's giving the opportunity for people to have a voice where else
Yeah.
they don't have a voice, right? I mean, like your example with the airlines is a great example, right? Because yeah, you might fly one airline predominantly, but what if like you need like because of just the fact that you fly certain places, you need to like have seven different airlines that you have access to. Like
Exactly.
I'll be the first one to say like I have like six airline apps on my phone, right? It's like
Life is a
why?
tough
Why? Why do I need that? Right? Like why do I need six different apps to like literally just book Seattle to whatever or Seattle to here, right? Um
Yeah.
the idea that's interesting to me. Like the idea that nothing about me changes unless I say it changes, right? So
Yeah.
like why do I need to have copies of the same information all over the world, right? Um
Yeah.
anyway, that I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm more knowledgeable in the fact of what the value is because I think it. I'll be the first one to say like I hear web and then some number and I'm like, all right,
Like,
what
okay.
are we doing? What are we doing here? But no, I really appreciate you spending some time to kind of demystify what actual Web 5 is, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like oh we're gonna make some money off of something. No, it's about taking like things that make sense and actually trying to implement them across
Yeah.
technology, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
Other than just another buzz thing for people to kind of attach to make money, which I think
Yeah.
is, not to knock Web 3, but that's what Web 3 is anyway.
Yeah. Can
So
I
this
do
has
one
been,
more Example? Sorry, before
yeah,
I
please
know
do, please
we're
do.
like wrapping up. You're like, there's 1 minute,
No, you're
but
fine, you're fine.
that just popped into my head. Is this company called Form Free? They basically, I'll call it like Tinder for banks, right? They basically have you own your like credit score and all your information, and you could say, hey, I'm interested in a loan, but I don't want to reveal the fact that I'm black or I live in this particular neighborhood or
Mm.
whatever, create unconscious bias. And then you'll use Web 5 to be like, okay, this is my credit score. Banks come in and they say, oh, we are interested in giving you a loan. And you now have the power to be like, oh, swipe, swipe, swipe. I want this bank in particular. And then you get matched. And then that's when more of your information gets revealed. Just wanted to put that one because it just popped in my head.
That's cool, but I mean,
Yeah,
we need to workshop Tinder for banks because that sounds awful.
that's
That
what
sounds so
that's
bad. I know
on me.
that's your thing. We need to workshop it. And I imagine the folks at Form Free, they're figuring out like a better way to kind of
They're
do
like,
that.
oh,
Tinder
oh,
for
oh,
banks, I just imagine it's like, oh, nope, nope, no, no.
that's
That's
how
funny.
it's gonna work.
No, but that's a great. So again, based on who I am, I don't think about things like that where it's like, oh, like if I live in a certain part of the country, like,
Yeah,
or if I have a different background, like I might not get the same rates on my mortgage,
yeah,
right? Which is absolutely terrible, but that's the life we live, right? Um, so the ability to basically anonymously say, like, here's my credit score, here's like some demographic data about me, give me a rate. And the banks are like, here you go, that's great. If we can get the banking industry in that particular scenario to be able to accommodate that, that's great because it means, like you said, it takes out all of the non-essential parts of the decision making process that are a part of them today, right?
exactly.
Um, because at the end of the day, all the banks really care about is eliminating risk, and they think where you're from, who you are, to an extent, is risk, which is boring, right? Um, yeah, that's a great way to end it. Like the ability to, you know, to have a bit more control, not just about like your data, like we talked about, or reusing data, but also the ability to like get opportunities that you might not get access to because of reasons, right?
Yeah.
And if we can get to a point, I think that society benefits from that completely. This has been very enlightening for me, so I appreciate it. I've enjoyed this chat so much, Roselle. This has been great. Like, it's been so nice to get to know you more, know a little bit about your background, about what you find interesting in tech, and now I know, like, actually can have a somewhat conversation with somebody about Web 5 and not sound like an idiot, which I think is pretty cool. Um, So we've talked about a handful of things, right? Like, and I'd like to get, as we wrap up, we've talked about your history a little bit. We've talked about what you're doing today. Obviously, we've talked about some things that are interesting. If you could, summarize this conversation in a word or two, what do you think that word would be for you?
Oh shoot. Oh, that's a good question. Taking. I don't know. Like, why is taking advantage of opportunities popping to mind
That's
for me?
cool. That's cool. You could just get rid of everything and just say opportunity.
Opportunities.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. There we go. That's great. I mean, I totally agree. I think we talked about this, right? Like the ability to seize the moment and like, hey, I want this, I'm gonna go grab it. And I think you're a perfect example of like, I want this, I'm gonna do it. And I think you've been pretty happy with the results to date. And this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you being on. If folks want to, if you're not, please follow Rizel. Like all the places, the best place probably is Twitter.
Sure.
You can find her Black Girl Bites, so BlackGirlBytes. There'll also be some links in the description of this podcast, for some other places you can find her and things that she's doing. As we wrap up, my friend, is there anything that you'd like to say?
Thanks for having me. This was a really fun conversation.
I'm glad. I'm glad. Like I said, just as long as you enjoyed it, that's all that matters to me. And I hope you enjoyed too, folks that were tuning in live and folks that are listening to the future. My name is Isaac Levin from Coffee and Open Source. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.